So, do GPAs matter? This is a question that a lot of people freak out about, and really, I think is more high school bound than really college bound. So here's the deal. This really varies on what you do in college, where you go to college. If your college is public or private, if you do internships, if you do co-ops, and sort of how your grades are. In many cases, a lot of people traditionally think that your grades show your understanding or lack thereof in a certain subject. So, ideally speaking, if the system works, someone with a 4.0 should know more than someone with a 2.9. But what's weird is, generally speaking, if you don't have a great GPA, it might just be because you were spending time doing other things you were just more interested in doing. So say you had a startup you're working on with your friends, or you had a software project, or something you were building. In many cases, those things can be actually much more of an asset to you when you go to look for a real job, or even look for internships and co-ops. Because in the real world, as much as you'd like to probably think that your hard work and test-taking skills help you, they really don't. Because people in the real world, they care about what you can get done, not what a piece of paper says you should theoretically be able to. And this is a really big thing that supports this is the way Google has modified their hiring techniques. So at this point, they literally don't even look at GPAs. And quite frankly, there are a lot of co-op employers that I've met with that, at least engineering-wise, have stated that people who have higher GPAs generally don't work well in groups. They are much better suited for kind of academia as a whole, and usually have a really bizarre understanding or perspective on like how the real world works. So myself, I have like a pretty decent GPA. It's not bad, but it's not great. And this is pretty much how I've sort of done school since high school. I never really had stellar grades, but I always did a lot of external things from school that interested me personally and that were still somewhat relevant to what I wanted to do. So, when do GPAs matter? If you go to a state school and say you do zero internships, if you don't have a great GPA, the likelihood of you being hired anywhere and making any money that's decent is pretty slim. If you have a 2.9 and say you went to like UT Austin or USC, you're kind of shit out of luck because there are plenty of people who might have done a few internships, say just say they didn't, but someone who has a perfect 4.0, even if they have zero experience, which is kind of a pretty big mark against you, is instantaneously going to be seen as better than you. Now, if you go to private schools, some of which offer co-op programs, programs that place you in internships through relationships the school has formed with industry, honestly, whatever you do in those internships or co-ops will have significantly more importance than any of your grades. Because in the grand scheme of things, your grades really aren't going to matter. I mean, 10 years from now, when you've graduated and you've been working in whatever field you want to work in for 5 years, assuming that's sort of vaguely related to what you studied, no one's going to care about your grades. They're going. I mean, you can have perfect grades, claim to know Python or C++ perfectly, but if you can't do anything, real, if you can't build any applications or build websites with it, get anything done, then no one's going to want to hire you. And one thing a lot of people sort of miss, and this especially is a problem for people who made perfect grades in high school and think that if I make perfect grades, I'm set for life. And honestly, that couldn't be more wrong. So, real world experience or doing anything will always be more important than grades. Grades come in to factor if you say you're applying for a job at a really really large company that would say reduce the number of applicants based on GPA. That's really one of the only places that's important. Or if you want to go to graduate school, which in this day and age is really just a waste of money. Or if you want to travel off into academia and convince yourself that you're doing things that really matter when in reality you just don't have the balls to get a real job and approach the real world. So what I'd say is if you have a lot of co-op experience, if you have that ability at your school, by all means do that. And quite frankly, after that first co-op, if you establish like a really good standing, even if it's not, even if it's a company no one's ever heard of, and you worked as hard as possible, even if you had no idea what you're doing, that's more of an asset than making perfect grades in a class. If you go to a state school, you're going to need better grades, and you can help that if you find internships. And in certain cases, finding internships and finding good internships can actually be more of an asset than even a co-op program at a private university. So, in the grand scheme of things, I'd say GPA doesn't really matter. You can disagree with me, but I plan to not really go to graduate school and go straight into industry as soon as I graduate. Quite frankly, I think I laugh at people who sit behind their good grades and say they're better than other people, because in reality, usually those people have a very incorrect view of the way the world works and generally will be more suited for academia. So if someone comes up to you and is like, "Oh, your grades suck. You're never going to get a job," you can, flick them off. Like they're completely wrong. So still get good grades. Still try to learn things. Because you're going to school for that in the first place. But as long as you generally know what you're doing and you feel like you're learning and you're enjoying what you're doing, and you have any bit of real world experience, you're set. So that's what I think about GPA.